Good afternoon. It is exactly 3 p.m. here in Nairobi. A very good morning to you. Good evening, depending on where you're tuned in. And you are watching us from the show is Diaspora Dispatches, where I get to bring you the latest news from across the continent of Africa. So without wasting so much of your time, let's just get into the news. And we start from South Sudan. And South Sudan's main opposition political party, Sudan People's Liberation Movement in Opposition, SPLM-IO, is demanding that President Salva Kiir reinstates Defense Minister Angelina Teny. President Kiir sacked Ms. Teny on Friday in a presidential decree. She was the country's first female defense minister. The president also dismissed Interior Minister Mahmoud Solomon. No reasons were given for their sacking. Mr. Kiir also swapped the Ministry of Defense to his political party, the Sudan People's Liberation Movement SPLM, and the Interior Ministry to the SPLM-IO. The SPLM-IO has condemned and rejected the unilateral removal of Ms. Teny. It called it a violation of the revitalized peace agreement, which gives parties the power to remove their representatives in the Council of Ministers and nominate the replacements by notifying the president. It said swapping of the ministries also violates the provisions of the peace agreement, which require the parties to agree on the allocation, the selection of the ministerial portfolios in the unity government. In a statement, Riek Machar, the SPLM-IO leader and the first vice president, called for the president to revoke the unilateral decree, adding that his party was committed to the revitalized agreement. Analysts say the latest move seems to suggest the relations between Mr. Kiir and Mr. Machar remain strained. And just in case you don't know, the sacked minister, that is Angelina Teny, is also the wife of the first vice president indeed, Dr. Riek Machar. And the U.S. ambassador to Nigeria has said the 25th February elections failed to meet Nigerians' expectations. In a statement, Mary Leonard urged the Electoral Commission to address the hitches it experienced before the governorship polls on the 11th of March. The envoy urged INEC to be more transparent as it makes reforms in the election systems. She commended the presidential poll losers opposition People's Democratic Party's PDP Atiku Abubakar and Peter Obi of Labour Party for pledging to go to court to challenge the outcome of the vote. INEC has said it will deploy its voter identification system for the 11th of March elections and pledged to punish its officials found to have compromised the presidential election. We head over to Tunisia, where President has denounced racism on Sunday and pointed to possible legal consequences for perpetrators. The 10 days after announcing a crackdown on illegal migration using language the African Union condemned as racialized hate speech. During a statement on February 21st, telling security forces to expel all illegal immigrants, President Kais Saied called migration a conspiracy to change Tunisia's demographics by making it more African and less Arab. Police detained hundreds of migrants, landlords summarily evicted hundreds from their homes, and hundreds of others were fired from work, rights group is now saying. Many migrants say they had been attacked, including being pelted with stones by gangs of youths in their neighborhoods, and rights groups said police had been slow to respond to such assaults. While Said denied racism in a statement on February 23rd, he repeated his view of immigration as a demographic plot. Before Sunday, Said had not publicly warned of any legal consequences for the attacks. In Sunday's statement, he described the accusations of racism as a campaign against the country from known sources without elaborating. But he added that Tunisia was honored to be an African country and announced a relaxation of visa rules for African citizens, allowing stays of up to 6 months instead of 3 without seeking residency, and of a year for students. He said migrants who had overstayed could leave without penalty after many of those authorities sought to report had proven unable to pay fines for late stays. He painted his crackdown on illegal migration as being a campaign against human trafficking and pointed to a law passed in 2018 against discrimination to say that any verbal or physical attacks on foreigners will be prosecuted. Opposition parties and rights groups have said Said's crackdown on immigrants, which coincided with the arrest of senior opposition figures, was aimed at distracting from Tunisia's economic crisis. Burkina Faso has put the north and parts of Center-East region under curfew to aid the fight against jihadists. That is according to official documents seen on Sunday by the AFP. The long-running insurgency in the impoverished Sahel nation has left thousands of civilians, police and soldiers dead and forced more than 2 million people to flee their homes. The curfews ban the movement overnight of people and the use of 2- and 4-wheeled vehicles. And a curfew was also set up for March over Kupelogo province and administrative communique from the High Commission in the area close to Ghana and Togo, as well as the central north and BAM region. In mid-February, an overnight curfew set up in 2019 in the East region was extended for 3 months to May 21st. Jihadi assaults have increased this year, leaving dozens of civilians and members of the security forces dead every week. The army announced a provisional death toll of 51 in February 17th ambush in the far north, for which the Islamist State group claimed responsibility. It was the deadliest attack in Burkina since Army Captain Ibrahim Traoré seized power in a coup last September. Around 40% of the nation's territory lies outside government control. Anger within the Burkinabe military at failures to roll back the insurgency led to 2 coups last year. Adding to the regional instability was the setting ablaze at the weekend of a police border post on the Niger side of the border. Local sources reported on Sunday that unidentified heavily armed men on motorbikes attacked the station on Saturday at Makalonde, several kilometers behind the Burkinabe border, while police saying one civilian suffered gunshot wounds. A local official told the AFP there had been substantial material damage. The station had previously been targeted in December 2021 in an attack by presumed jihadists, which left 6 people dead. Makalonde is the tri-border zone near the frontiers with Burkina Faso, Mali, and prone to attacks from armed jihadist groups, notably the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara. And the Catholic Archbishop of Abuja Diocese, Ignatius Kaigama, on Sunday called on justices of the Supreme Court to do their work with the greatest sense of justice, as God is watching from above how they will dispense justice as litigants disappointed with the results of the general election head for the tribunal. He also warned political leaders against fighting dirty, rigging or manipulating elections if their desire is to genuinely serve the common good. Kaigama stated this in his homily delivered at St. Augustine's Parish, Lugbe, on a Sunday. And I'll just quote what this Nigerian priest said. I urge you to keep hope alive. We conclude our presidential and National Assembly elections last Saturday. We concluded. Many people turned out and enthusiastically voted, believing that transparency promised would be guaranteed, but it did not happen in all cases, as many felt that the process was compromised. Many wanted street protest, but thanks to the maturity of the top contenders who called on to exercise caution and obedience to the laws of the land, we have yet survived together again, as against those predicting doom. We encouraged people to get out and get registered, to obtain their voters' cards, to go out and vote. They enthusiastically trooped out to vote, but to their greatest chagrin, the process did not achieve the degree of transparency expected. Despite all, remain calm and peaceful. Those not satisfied with the results are heading to the courts, and let the courts do their work with a greater sense of justice. God above is watching how the courts, the hope of the common man and woman, will perform. The Supreme Judge of the ultimate tribunal is waiting for those who dispense justice with a sense of fairness, or do so with great personal bias, or get compromised because of some material reasons. Let justice be done. Let peace reign. May God protect Nigeria and Nigerians. Okay, so this is a Catholic priest in the Archdiocese of Abuja. So from what he just said there, he's also casting doubt on the legality of the elections that took place in Nigeria on the 25th. I think that is what he's saying there, but he's saying let the courts do the right thing because God is watching. Okay. All right, we'll just move on from that and head on to Ethiopia, where Tigray's People's Liberation Front (TPLF) rebels have denied establishing a transitional administration in the northern region in accordance with the peace agreement signed in November last year. A local news website reported that the TPLF had finalized the process of forming a 28-member interim regional administration, which needed approval by the federal government. However, TPLF spokesperson Getachew Reda said the Tigray interim administration would only be established after mutual consultations between the parties to the Pretoria Agreement. Major political parties in the region have been calling for an inclusive interim government to steer the region as it tries to recover from the devastating civil war. Last month, the opposition parties in Tigray boycotted a conference on the formation of an interim government, accusing the TPLF of monopolizing the process. Another jihadist news, this time from Mauritania, and 4 jihadist prisoners escaped from Mauritanian prison in the capital, Nouakchott, after killing prison guards, the Interior Ministry has said. The incident occurred on Sunday night amid a reported fire exchange in which the 2 guards were killed and 2 others were wounded. The authorities have tightened security around the prison and a hunt for the fugitives is underway. The Interior Ministry has urged the public to report any information that could help apprehend the fugitives. Head over to the Central African Republic. And former Central African Republic President Francois Bozize has gone into exile in Guinea-Bissau. President Umaro Sissoco Embalo has confirmed Bozize, who is 76 years old, landed in the host capital Bissau on Thursday aboard a special flight from Chad, where he had been hiding since 2021. The former coup and rebel leader was received by President Embalo, who ushered him into a house paid by the Bissau government. The Guinea-Bissau leader is the chairperson of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. Bozize ruled Central African Republic from 2003, and he overthrew Felix Patasse in a coup until he was kicked out in yet another coup in 2013. Since then, Central African Republic has been mired in crisis and coup attempts, with Bozize suspected of being one of the main instigators. And the latest from Burundi is that the first part of the Burundian troops pledged to deploy to the volatile Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo has arrived in Goma. The 7-nation East African community began deploying troops last year in the Eastern DRC, which has been struggling with the rise of militia, including the rebel March 23 movement. The fighting in North Kivu province has displaced huge numbers of people and exacerbated regional tensions between the DRC government accusing Rwanda of backing the M23, claims denied by Kigali but supported by the US and several Western nations. The militia re-emerged from dormancy in late 2021, subsequently occupying large pieces of territory in North Kivu, including much of the region north of its capital in Goma. The EAC, which has held several meetings to defuse the crisis and called for the withdrawal of the M23 from the occupied areas, created a regional force aimed at stabilizing the eastern DRC. But thousands demonstrated in Goma last month, accusing the EAC's force of passivity in the face of armed groups. The troops will be deployed in Kachanga and Kiloriwe, areas occupied by the M23 North Kivu, as well as Saki, he said, on condition of anonymity. This is one of the army officials from Burundi. An EAC press statement on Friday confirmed Burundian troops would be deployed on Saturday, but did not elaborate on the number of soldiers traveling to the DRC. According to a new timetable adopted by the East African leaders last month, all armed groups, including M23, must withdraw by March 30th, following a 3-step process that was due to start on February 28th. And the heads of states and officials from different nations met in Doha on Sunday for the opening of the 5th United Nations Conference on Least Developed Countries. The conference opened with remarks from the president of the conference, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, Emir of Qatar, in which he criticized delays of humanitarian aid to Syria following the devastating earthquake. And the climate change and its effect on at least developed countries was one of the main topics discussed during the opening. Sapo Korosi, president of the 77th session of the General Assembly, warned of the ominous effects of climate change on the least developed countries, stating that the demand of water is expected to exceed supply by 40% by the end of the decade. In his address, the Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu thanked international support during the darkest days of the earthquake aftermath and credited least developed countries for being the first to help. The LDC conference, held every decade, was postponed in 2021 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The fifth edition of the conference convenes for 5 days amid challenges facing the world as a result of the Ukraine war, global food security crisis, climate change, and the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Archbishop of the Anglican Church of Kenya has said England will no longer be the lead of the global Anglican Church, following a change in teaching to allow priests to marry same-sex couples. Archbishop Jackson Ole Sapir told a local television station that the church's teaching that homosexuality is a sin would not change. The Church of England last month backed proposals to allow prayers of blessings for the same-sex couples. But it said its position on gay marriage would not change, and same-sex couples would still be unable to marry in the church. Archbishops representing 10 of the 42 provinces in the Anglican Communion have said they no longer consider Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, as their leader. And that is the latest news from across the continent of Africa. I will just not even talk about that. This meeting that was happening in Doha on Sunday, it's a summit, it's a conference on least developed countries, and it is headed by Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, the Emir of Qatar. I don't like the sound of that. Why are we having a conference about the least developed countries in the most developed countries? Why can't we have one of those conferences down here? The global south is majority of the least developed countries are in the global south. So why can't we have it around a country that, you know, is least developed, and then we sit together and we see how can we discuss our solutions and how can we find solutions to our problems. Why is this meeting being led by the Emir of Qatar? Yeah. For me, it rings a bell when you think about when I was just reading through this story. I think something like Commonwealth came to mind, something like Francafrique came to mind. Of course, those two organizations, I don't like the background of it all because they emanated from colonialism. So usually I have a problem with that. I just have a problem with that period. But, you know, our leaders still feel it's a very important thing and it's crucial for us to be in such institutions, which I really don't get. So this one here, a coming together of least developed countries, this should be an organization that the least developed countries have on their own as they try to charter their way forward as far as development is concerned. So if Qatar is the chair of this, I have a problem, and I will have a problem if the US also was the chair. I'll have a problem if Britain was the chair, not just because it is Qatar. Because when you look at this, it's like, let's bring this section of countries together and let's see how, even as we pretend to want to support, and maybe they're supporting, or maybe they have an agenda that will get us out of poverty. I don't know. Maybe that is just part of it. And they will be agitating for the rights of the marginalized country or underdeveloped countries. I'm not sure how effective that is going to be. But I just feel like it is a control thing. Let's bundle them together and then let's set our agenda in the disguise that we're here to help these countries, in the disguise that we're here to lend our voice in seeing that they develop. And I don't like that. I don't know why I hope that my country was not present in this summit, but if I went and looked further, probably it was represented, but I'm not sure. I just have a problem with these kinds of initiatives and these kinds of organizations that are very targeted, if I may use that word. I don't like it at all. I don't like the idea of Commonwealth, the psychology around it and the reasons around it. And I feel like it is a tool for control, the same as Francophrique. And now you see with France, the relationship with its former colonies is weighing out. And France is just scampering around, trying to make new ties, trying to, do some public relations exercises. And President Macron has been on gymnastics in this continent, trying to salvage any other relationship that is still remaining. And, the last week he was promising now France will back away and France will stop imposing itself so much on its former colonies and the other African countries and all that. Yada, yada, yada. Long stories. But we know that is not going to be the case, because France's interest still remains true. They might change the strategy, they might change their approach, but France's foreign policy in Africa still remains the same. And it will remain the same until Africans decide to change. You see, when Burkina Faso and Mali decided to stand their ground, of course, they were influenced by other factors and other, perhaps, nations. France did not have a choice. So if that is, those are the stands, if we can unite in standing on certain decisions, then these powers that are out there will have no choice but to respect whatever it is that we want done. If we say from today, we shall not be showing up at the United Nations until you tell us why. Africa cannot have a permanent membership slot at the United Nations Security Council, and everybody makes a decision not to show up at the United Nations. Let me tell you, they will stop and they will consider this issue. But it's because of how we flip-flop. We take very weak stands. We are not united. And so they take advantage of that. The left are divided, the colonialists, and they have made sure that they continue that division, and they continue by that division with the leaders to which they support, who are in power in the different African countries. So we have to smarten up. We really must smarten up. So this thing of fifth UN conference on least developed countries, I don't like the idea. And if the least developed countries, let the least developed countries take care of themselves. Let them sit down and set their agendas for themselves. Let them sit down and craft the developmental agenda for themselves. And so that they can find a solution. They can exchange notes. They know where the problem is, and then see how they can develop themselves to a place where there will be an improvement in these economic areas. But for such a conference to be held in Qatar, it was the fifth United Nations conference. I don't like the sound of that. Who thought this was a good idea? What are you discussing? What are you discussing there? Even at the United Nations, the much developed countries can get is the position of the Secretary General. The Secretary General of the United Nations, the condition is this person must come from developing countries, the least developed countries, sort of the developing countries, right? Yeah, so that is what we've been given as a token. But outside of that, we don't have a voice. We don't have our voices don't matter. As long as we don't have anyone who represent our interests at the United Nations Security Council, every other thing is it does not matter. I know there are several ways in which decisions are made at the United Nations. One of them is through the United Nations Security Council. The other one is through the United Nations General Assembly votes. But even if you voted on that, like we voted against Russia, majority, other issues have been voted upon, it never results to any tangible results or implementations, because, like I was saying in the morning, the implementations of some of these resolutions and decisions that have been reached at the United Nations majorly depends on the goodwill of the member states. But until we get that position at the United Nations Security Council from a third world country, then everything else is just gymnastics. Yes, because the United Nations Security Council is a very important organ, and they have the veto power, the members there, especially the 5 permanent members over there. So their vote overrides everything else, every other decision. So it's really useless. I think we're just there as I don't want to say as flower girls, but we're just there to for formalities, but our voices really does not matter. So I don't know whose idea was this to have this United Nations conference on the least developed countries. This was its fifth year, and it was being held in Qatar. Why can't we have that in Nairobi? Why can't we have that in Kampala? Why can't we have that in Burundi, in other countries that are least developed? Why are we having this conference of countries that are not developed, the least developed countries in Qatar, one of the most developed countries and wealthy countries in the world? What is that? That is oxymoronic. What are you discussing there? Were we represented effectively? I don't get it. I just don't get it. But anyway, I'll wait to see what this conference is set out to achieve. They started a meeting yesterday. Hopefully, I think the end of today they would have come up with some proper. I really want to understand what is it that they do. Of course, they brought up the issue of the climate change, and that was looked at last year during COP27, and of course during COP26 and the other COPs. And the agreement was that the most developed countries, which are the biggest contributors to these dangerous emissions, are supposed to be contributing to what they call damage something fund to go towards aiding in issues to do with climate conditions and changes in the poor countries who are the least contributors. That was agreed upon. So during this meeting, Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad, reiterated on this matter. So he's just pushing for that. I don't know what this. I still make me understand why we are having the conference on least developed countries in one of the most developed countries. Have me understand that, because I don't get it. I don't get it at all. Doesn't make any sense to me. Anyway, I'm trying to avoid stories that I have to go for long a talk. Because I'd like for us to have that story of Bozize in the morning tomorrow, not right now. But let's look at this Nigerian story very quickly, because I have just a few minutes. The Archbishop of Abuja Diocese, Ignatius Kaigama, I was just reading through what he said yesterday, and I watched his statements over the just concluded elections in Nigeria. And of course, from what he's saying, we can see he's casting the doubt of the credibility of the just concluded elections by what he was saying. And he says, we urged these people to go and take their votes and register as voters. We urged them to go and vote. We urged them to maintain peace. But from what we've seen turn out, it appears as if the will of the people of Nigeria was not respected. This is what the bishop was saying in so many words. I'm just giving you a summary of what he was saying, okay? And he's saying, and people were enthusiastic, Nigerians, the young people, everybody was enthusiastic for change. And instead, it appears that the process was compromised. So if this is a respected bishop of the Catholic Church, a respected church, is speaking out, then things are not okay. And now he's saying, you judges of the Supreme Court, as you even wait to listen to hear this case and to decide on it, then you have to remember that God is watching. I mean, if you scared me by God is watching, that will scare me, because I have a good amount of respect, for God out of my faith. So if you came to me from that perspective, I might want to pause and think about the decision or what I'm about to do, and hopefully I make the right decision after that. So that is what he's telling these judges. So even as you sit down to let the courts do their work, he said, with the greatest sense of justice. God above is watching how the court, the hope of the common man and woman, he's saying that is the only hope. So your responsibilities as the judges of this apex court, don't take it lightly, because you hold the aspiration and of the people of Nigeria in your hands. Okay, that is a huge responsibility to place in the courts. but as it should, right? And so the hopes of everybody else who felt justice was not meted or this election was not done in a way that reflected their will, the results thereof. And so the court is the last reprieve. So these judges must understand what great undertaking they now have in front of them. And even as they start listening to this case, they must consider justice above all. And the Supreme Judge of the ultimate tribunal is waiting for those who dispense justice. So now he's saying, you could be just judges here. I feel like I'm looking at a sermon. You are Supreme Court judges, but the Supreme Judge, who is God, is watching. He's the ultimate tribunal. So make no mistake, and is waiting to see how you will dispense justice. And if you have to dispense this justice, then it has to be done with a sense of fairness, or to do so with great personal bias. You should not have any personal bias, and you should not be compromised because of some material reasons. He said, let justice be done, and let peace reign in Nigeria, and may God protect Nigeria, and may God protect Nigerians themselves. So I think the work is cut out there for the Supreme Court judges, and the U.S. itself has come out and said these elections were compromised. That's what the U.S. said. The U.S. ambassador to Nigeria said the 25th February elections failed to meet the Nigerians' expectations. In a statement, Mary Leonard, who is the ambassador there, urged the Electoral Commission to address the hitches it experienced before the governorship polls on the 11th of March. He said it is clear that the electoral process as a whole on the 25th of February failed to meet Nigerians' expectations. So they're saying this system was compromised. So she continues, with that, reiterate our call on INEC to promptly address the challenges that can be resolved ahead of the 11th March gubernatorial election, so that the country does not see a repeat of some of these problems that are now compromising the credibility of this poll. So the EU also shared their discontent with parts of how that election was carried out. And I don't know if this will have any bearing. So let's just, I guess, wait and see if at all anything will be done. And now I think all eyes are just trailed on the Supreme Court. I don't know when they're expected to start this case. I think I'll look up the information, and I'll bring us up to date tomorrow, the timelines and how that works. In Kenya, it's very clear. In Nigeria, I'm not too sure, so I don't want to mislead you with misinformation. So I'll do my research and I'll come back here tomorrow, and I'll give us an update on that. I want to thank you so much for your time this afternoon. My name is Miriam Guto. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.